Rome didn't just defeat kings. It erased them. Not with a sword in battle, but with a ritual that turned royal blood into a warning sign. A tradition so sacred, it could destroy an entire bloodline in a single afternoon. And the crowd would cheer. This is the hidden machinery behind Rome's victories. A dark war tradition that didn't end when the fighting stopped. It began when the enemy king arrived in chains, kept alive for one reason. So Rome could make his death official. The man at the center of this story didn't start as a monster in Roman memory. He started as a miracle. His name was Vercingetorix. A young Arvernian noble from Gaul. Raised among riders, warriors, and rival chieftains who spent more time fighting each other than any foreign enemy. Gaul wasn't one nation. It was a patchwork of tribes, alliances, feuds, and temporary oaths. The kind of place where unity was a dream people talked about right before betraying each other. Rome loved places like that. Because Rome didn't always need to conquer with legions. Sometimes it conquered with deals. Hostages. Bribes. Promises. If you were a Gallic noble, Rome could offer you status, protection, trade, even a Roman future. And if you said no, Rome could offer you something else, a burning village and a lesson. By the time Vercingetorix stepped onto the stage, Rome was already deep inside Gaul. The man pushing the invasion forward was not a king, but something Rome feared even more, an ambitious Roman commander with an army that loved him. Julius Caesar. Caesar needed victories. Not just to expand Rome's borders, but to secure his own political survival. Conquest wasn't only war. It was currency. Glory was leverage. And Gaul was a goldmine of prestige if it could be subdued. Then Vercingetorix did what Gaul almost never managed to do. He united it. Not perfectly. Not peacefully. But effectively. He used fear, persuasion, and ruthless discipline to drag rival tribes into the same cause: expel Rome. In Roman storytelling, that made him a villain. In Gallic memory, it made him a last hope. He wasn't just a battlefield commander. He was an idea. A banner. A face that said, "We do not have to kneel." And for a moment, just a moment, it worked. His strategy wasn't to beat Rome in a glorious open-field duel. It was to starve Rome. To burn supplies. To deny roads and grain. To turn Gaul into a trap that swallowed invaders slowly. It was brutal. Villages sacrificed so the larger land could survive. Crops torched. Storehouses emptied. A war fought against Rome's stomach. Caesar's legions were feared for discipline and engineering. Vercingetorix made Gaul itself the weapon. So why does history remember him? Because he forced Rome to feel something it hated feeling. Uncertainty. Rome could handle enemies. Rome could handle rebellions. But Rome did not like a man who could turn scattered tribes into a single fist. A man who could deny the empire its favorite certainty, that resistance was pointless. And when Rome finally broke him, it didn't just want him defeated. It wanted him displayed. Preserved. Saved for the final act of Rome's darkest tradition. A ritual older than many emperors. A celebration that ended with a death. The triumph. Vercingetorix rose like wildfire, fast, violent, unstoppable once it caught. He wasn't born as king of Gaul. There was no throne waiting for him. His power came from a world where authority was constantly contested, and leadership was paid for in blood and loyalty. But he understood something Rome understood better than anyone else. People don't follow ideas. They follow a person who makes the idea feel inevitable. When Rome's pressure intensified, some Gallic nobles leaned toward surrender. They thought they could survive under Roman shadow. Others wanted war but lacked unity. Vercingetorix forced the choice. He seized power among his own people and began pulling tribes into a common cause. It wasn't just speeches. It wasn't romantic. He demanded hostages from allies. He punished betrayal. He built obedience with consequences. And then he offered the one thing Gaul had been starving for: coordination. He called councils. He set shared plans. He demanded shared sacrifice. His most terrifying decision was also his most effective: scorched earth. The Romans marched on logistics. Roads, grain, supply trains. Caesar's army could build bridges in days and fortifications in hours, but it still needed food. Vercingetorix ordered villages burned and fields destroyed to keep Rome from feeding. To the people whose homes went up in flames, it felt like betrayal. To Rome, it felt like madness. But it worked. Caesar advanced into a land that was turning into ashes. Every step cost more. Every mile stretched supply lines thinner. The legions were disciplined, but hunger is a slow mutiny. And while Rome struggled to consume Gaul, Vercingetorix focused on consuming Rome's certainty. He chose battles carefully. He harassed. He ambushed. He vanished. He pushed Rome into frustration, into mistakes. And the message traveled. Not only across Gaul. Across Caesar's own army. Because Rome's power was psychological as much as physical. The moment people believed Rome could be resisted, Rome's aura cracked. And a cracked aura is dangerous. It invites more defiance. To many Gauls, Vercingetorix became more than a commander. He became a symbol that their disunited tribes could act like a nation, even if only for a season. To Caesar, he became something else. A political threat. Because Caesar couldn't afford a long war. A messy war. A war that looked like Rome was struggling. Back in Rome, rivals watched him closely. Every delay was ammunition. Every setback was a reason to question his command. So Caesar did what he always did. He escalated. He moved faster. Built bigger. Punished harder. He used terror as policy, because terror worked. Not always, but often enough. And as Rome tightened its grip, the war turned into a contest of wills. On one side, a man with an empire's machine. On the other, a man trying to become a nation's heartbeat. Then came the moment that would define everything. Alesia. A hilltop stronghold. A decision to stand and fight. A place that would become a cage. And in that cage, Rome's darkest tradition was already waiting, patient, hungry, and ceremonial. Alesia wasn't just a battle. It was a test to see whether unity in Gaul was real, or just a myth that collapses under pressure. Vercingetorix chose Alesia because it offered height, defenses, and a chance to force Caesar into a costly assault. He believed relief forces could gather from across Gaul. He believed the tribes would come. He believed that if Caesar was trapped long enough, Rome's hunger would do what swords couldn't. Caesar saw Alesia and didn't see a fortress. He saw a stage. If he could break Vercingetorix in one dramatic, undeniable victory, the entire war could end with a single headline. Not in a newspaper, Rome didn't need one. The story would travel by rumor and authority. Caesar crushed the great rebel. So Caesar built the impossible. He didn't just surround Alesia with walls. He built 2 rings. One ring to keep Vercingetorix in. One ring to keep the relief army out. Lines of fortifications. Trenches. Stakes. Traps. Towers. Patrol roads. A fortress around a fortress. It was not just engineering. It was psychological warfare made physical. Inside Alesia, the clock began to scream. Food dwindled. Hope became a currency. Decisions turned into knives. Every day the relief army didn't arrive made the next day worse. And unity, real unity, doesn't just require leaders. It requires sacrifice from people who don't get medals. The siege squeezed them until ethics snapped. The defenders faced the ugliest question in war. Who gets to eat? And outside the walls, the relief forces finally gathered. Massive, furious, desperate to prove that Gaul was not just a collection of tribes. They attacked Caesar's outer ring. Vercingetorix attacked from inside. It was a two-front storm meant to crack Rome open. For a moment, it almost worked. Roman lines buckled. Fighting turned chaotic. The kind of chaos where men stop thinking like soldiers and start thinking like animals. Caesar personally rushed reinforcements to where the line was breaking. He threw his reserves into the gap like a gambler placing his last coin. And Rome held. Not because Rome was invincible. Because Rome was trained for this kind of suffering. While Gaul fought like a surge, Rome fought like a machine that could lose parts and still function. The relief army faltered. Signals failed. Attacks lost timing. Confidence leaked away. And in war, confidence is blood. Then the turning point arrived, not as a grand speech, but as a collapse. The relief army retreated. Alesia was now only a prison. Inside the walls, Vercingetorix faced the reality he had tried to deny: the unity of Gaul had limits. You could summon tribes to an idea, but you couldn't guarantee they would die for it when the cost became unbearable. And betrayal didn't have to be a knife in the night. Betrayal could simply be absence. The failure to arrive. The failure to hold. Alesia didn't fall in one dramatic explosion. It fell in a slow, humiliating understanding. The Romans weren't leaving. The relief army wasn't coming back. And the people inside the walls were running out of time. So Vercingetorix made a choice that would be retold for centuries. A choice that saved some lives, and doomed his own. He would surrender. But he didn't surrender like a man begging. He surrendered like a man trying to control the ending, because he didn't yet understand Rome would not allow him that luxury. Rome didn't want him dead on a battlefield. Rome wanted him alive.
For the triumph. For the tradition.
For the final message to every royal line that dared to rise again. Surrender, in Roman war, was not a handshake. It was a conversion.
A king becomes a thing.
The story says Vercingetorix rode out in full armor, a final performance of dignity. Whether the details are embellished or not, the meaning is unmistakable. He offered himself as payment so others might live. He presented his body to the machine. Caesar accepted. And from that moment on, Vercingetorix stopped being a leader and became a prop. Chains do something worse than restrain the body. They rewrite the story. Because the Romans were masters of narrative. Conquest wasn't complete until it was made visible, undeniable, and public. The empire didn't just expand. It staged its expansion. And the most powerful stage in Rome was the triumph. The triumph was supposed to be sacred. A religious and political procession celebrating victory, honoring gods, and confirming that Rome's violence had cosmic approval. But inside that pageantry lived a blade. A tradition Rome rarely advertised in polite language. The enemy leader, especially a king, was often kept alive for years, preserved like a trophy, waiting for the day Rome would parade him. And that day would not be merciful. So Vercingetorix disappeared into Roman captivity.
Not a quick imprisonment. Not a clean end. A long erasure.
Year after year, he remained alive somewhere in the Roman system, while Caesar's power grew. While politics shifted. While Rome turned its appetite inward, devouring rivals as easily as it devoured foreign lands. Imagine what that does to a man. To know you are not being executed because they fear you. You are being kept because they need you. You are a living caption for someone else's glory. And then finally, the day arrives. Rome prepares the streets. The city becomes a corridor of spectacle. Soldiers line up.
Captives are marched. Spoils glitter. Banners rise.
The crowd swells. This is victory turned into theater. At the center of it all is Caesar, triumphant, adored, untouchable. But behind that triumph, like a shadow forced into daylight, comes the defeated leader. Vercingetorix. Not presented as a man who once made Rome tremble. Presented as proof that Rome has the right to crush anyone. The humiliation wasn't only the chains. It was the framing. The crowd wasn't asked to understand his cause. They were taught to mock it. His name, once a rallying cry, was now a punchline in the street. And Rome loved this part. Because the triumph wasn't just about celebrating what Rome had done. It was about teaching everyone what Rome could do again. To the conquered, it was a warning. To the ambitious inside Rome, it was propaganda. Follow Caesar, because Caesar brings victories so big even kings walk behind him in chains. And for royal bloodlines watching from afar, from client kingdoms, from uneasy allies, from future enemies, the message was colder than any blade. If you are born to rule, Rome can make you crawl.
But the worst part?
The procession wasn't the punishment.
It was the prelude.
Because Rome's darkest war tradition didn't end with humiliation. It ended with removal. A final act that didn't just kill a man, it severed the legitimacy of a people who might ever raise another king like him. And once you understand that, you realize Rome wasn't only conquering land. It was conquering the future. When the triumph ended, the cheering didn't mean mercy had arrived. It meant the ceremony was moving to its last room. Rome's tradition had a logic as sharp as iron. The enemy leader, displayed in the triumph, could not be allowed to walk away afterward. Not because he might physically escape, but because his survival would keep his cause alive. As long as the king lived, the story had an alternate ending. Rome hated alternate endings. So after the parade, the defeated leader was taken away. Not back to a cell to wait for another year. Not to live out a quiet exile. But to die, so the triumph could be sealed like wax on a document. Vercingetorix had been kept alive for this exact moment. The final act was not designed for gore. It was designed for finality. A captive king executed after the triumph is not simply a prisoner being punished. It is a ritual statement. Rome's victory is complete in the eyes of the gods, the people, and history. And that is why this tradition was so destructive to royal bloodlines. A king is more than a person. A king is a symbol of continuity. If Rome kills the king publicly in battle, the death can be interpreted as heroic. It can inspire revenge. It can make the fallen ruler into a martyr whose name becomes a rallying drum. But if Rome parades the king, shrinks him, reframes him, and then quietly ends him as part of a sacred celebration, that isn't martyrdom. That is humiliation turned into doctrine. It teaches the conquered that their highestborn can be reduced to a feature in Rome's festival. It doesn't just end one reign. It contaminates the idea of kingship itself. It makes future claimants look weaker before they even rise. And Rome did this again and again across its expansion. Not always in exactly the same form, not always recorded with the same detail, but the message stayed consistent. Leaders who resist Rome can be turned into an accessory, then erased. The brutality wasn't just physical. It was narrative brutality. Rome stole the right of the defeated to tell their own story. Vercingetorix's last hours, whatever precise steps occurred, were shaped by that theft. He was denied the clean dignity of dying in combat. Denied the agency of choosing the time. Denied even the ability to be remembered on his own terms, because Rome controlled the records, the monuments, the speeches, the official memory. That is what makes this tradition so dark. It turns a human being into punctuation. A period at the end of someone else's sentence. Caesar's triumph didn't just say, "I won." It said, "History belongs to me." And to Rome, that ownership mattered as much as territory. Because empires don't live on fear alone. They live on inevitability. If people believe Rome is inevitable, resistance becomes irrational.
It becomes suicide.
And the triumph, ending in execution, was one of Rome's most effective machines for manufacturing inevitability. So Vercingetorix vanished from life, but not from the lesson Rome wanted to broadcast. The king who united Gaul became the example used to keep Gaul divided. The man who tried to build a future became the sacrifice that warned against future attempts. And somewhere in the crowd, somewhere in the allied courts and nervous client kingdoms, other royal families understood what it meant. Rome would not merely defeat you. Rome would put your dynasty on display, and then end it as a celebration. Here is the part most people miss when they talk about Rome. They talk about legions,
steel, discipline, roads.
But Rome's most terrifying weapon wasn't the sword. It was the ending. Because Rome didn't treat war as something that stopped when the enemy surrendered. Rome treated surrender as the beginning of a second war, one fought against memory, legitimacy, and bloodlines. That is what the triumph really was. A victory parade, yes. But also a public surgery. Rome cut out the enemy's future while the crowd applauded. Think about what it means to keep a defeated leader alive for years, not out of mercy, but out of scheduling. To preserve a person like a display item. To delay death until the moment it can do the most political work. That is not random cruelty. That is calculated statecraft. It tells every conquered people, your nobility cannot protect you. Your bloodline does not make you untouchable. Your crown is not sacred. Rome decides what is sacred. And once that belief spreads, resistance collapses from the inside. Because who will follow a king if king now means future parade prisoner? This is why Rome could turn foreign royalty into client kings so easily. It wasn't only bribery.
It was fear.
A fear refined into an image, chains behind a chariot. A face once revered, now made small. It wasn't enough that Vercingetorix lost at Alesia. Rome needed every ambitious leader after him to feel that loss in their bones. Needed them to imagine the triumph before they ever raised a banner. Needed them to see the final tradition waiting at the end of rebellion, not a warrior's death, but a ceremonial disposal. And the cruel genius is this. Rome didn't have to threaten you directly. It only had to remind you of what it did to the last one. Because empires don't just conquer land. They conquer imagination. If you can make people imagine their defeat more vividly than their victory, you have already won. Vercingetorix tried to give Gaul a single heartbeat. Rome answered by showing Gaul what happens when a heart dares to beat too loud.
And Caesar?
He didn't just take a province. He took a story and rewrote it so completely that, for centuries, the world remembered the conqueror more clearly than the man who resisted. That is the darkest part of the tradition.
Not the chains.
Not the execution. The fact that it worked. So the next time you picture ancient Rome, don't picture marble and order. Picture a city that celebrated domination as religion. Picture a crowd watching a defeated king and learning, without a single spoken threat, that royal blood is not protection. It is a target. And ask yourself this. If an empire can kill a king, and also kill what the king means, how many kingdoms have vanished, not from the map, but from memory?